Mario is literally the most well-known video game franchise ever, so when people told me to make it in Minecraft, I had to give it a try. And honestly, I didn't think it'd be that bad. I've made games before, why would this be any different? Well, this ended up being the most complicated, most ridiculous, and arguably the most impressive machine I've ever made, taking me over 2 months to build. In this video, I'm going to show you all the logic, clever tricks, and engineering that went into it. You'll see how I planned the entire thing out and tackled all the problems along the way. This is how I made Mario with just redstone. First things first, I had to decide which Mario game to base this project on. There are hundreds of Mario games out there, but probably the most iconic is Super Mario Bros. Originally made in 1985 for the NES, Super Mario Bros. Is recognizable worldwide, and the community for it is still going strong 40 years later. Also, all the sprites and background graphics are available online, which makes them easy to reference if I need to. For these reasons, I thought NES Super Mario Bros. Was the obvious choice for me to recreate. Then I had to decide how many worlds and levels to put into the game. If I wanted to be complete, I'd have to make 8 worlds, 4 levels each, for a total of 32 levels. That seemed kind of insane, so I decided to do only the first level, 1-1, and without the underground section. There's still plenty of complexity in just the first level, especially for a redstone build, so I was perfectly happy to set this as my goal. Before building anything, I started thinking about how the display for the game is going to work. If you didn't know, these are the most common options for redstone displays. Redstone lamps, which have 2 colors, map displays, which have up to 16 colors, and texture packs, which have up to thousands of colors, and the ability to make animated sprites. One example of a texture pack display is the one I used for my Pac-Man build. If you put on this texture pack and right-click a redstone dust to turn it into a dot, it places a custom sprite on the side. And since there are 16 power levels of redstone, there are 16 different sprites. Super Mario Bros. Has a ton of sprites in it, so using a texture pack display for this project seemed like a great fit. However, this wasn't immediately a perfect solution. I quickly realized that a Mario display would have to be a lot more complicated than the Pac-Man one, for lots of reasons. One reason is because of smooth movement. In my Pac-Man game, Pac-Man simply snapped from tile to tile instead of smoothly moving between them. This made the logic a lot easier, and it looked fine because the screen was huge. But for Mario, snapping from tile to tile looks a lot more awkward, and I didn't really know how to handle that. Another reason is the background. In Pac-Man, the background never moved or changed, so I was able to make it by just retexturing blocks. But for Mario, the background needs to literally shift as you scroll through the level, which I also didn't really know how to do. And these weren't even the only problems, they were just the most pressing ones. So many things made a Mario display much more complex than any display I've made before, and it was at this point that I started to think I might be in over my head. After a day or two of trying to solve display problems and getting nowhere, I decided to talk to my friend Kane2, who you might recognize from my last video. He's the one that made the 4096 color texture pack display, so I thought he might be able to help me out with some texture pack knowledge. And I was right. He proceeded to show me some really cool techniques that I didn't even know were possible. First of all, textures can be literally any size, from 2x2 to 5x5 to even 128 by 128. And second, textures can be offset from the redstone by any 3D vector you want. For example, if you want the redstone dust to be here and the texture to be over here, no problem. Just give it that offset. And so over the next few hours, me and Kane took advantage of these properties and developed a full theoretical layout. Here's how it works. There are 5 separate layers. One for Mario, one for solid tiles like bricks and question blocks, one for items, one for mobs, and one for the background. The Mario layer uses redstone dots, and the other 4 layers use 4 different illegal states of redstone. So not only are there 16 possible sprites for the Mario layer, but there are 16 possible sprites for every layer individually. As the layers get further away, they have greater and greater offsets, which align all the textures to be in the front. For example, if there's an item here and a mob here, they all get aligned to be on that front face. Now, the tiles of the game are 8x8 Minecraft blocks in size. That's why these back layers only have 1 dust for every 8x8 blocks. But as you can probably tell, the Mario layer is much more dense, with 1 dust every 2x2 blocks. What this does is it creates 4x4 Mario positions for every tile of the game, enabling Mario to have smooth movement. When Mario is in the bottom left of that 4x4, his sprite is exactly within the tile. But as he moves, he goes through many positions before the next one, making it look much better than just snapping from one tile to the next. And yeah, that's basically all there is to the layout. 5 layers, all with different offsets to line up in the front, and a much denser Mario layer to create smooth movement. Thanks again to Kane2 and whoever else was on that Discord call for helping me out with this. Now that I had a layout, I could finally start building. First, the Mario layer. Like I said before, this layer has a 2x2 block density, and its responsibility is actually pretty simple. Just place Mario on the screen. So I went ahead and grabbed a signal strength matrix decoder, the same one from my Pac-Man video. If you haven't seen this before, it just takes in an X coordinate, a Y coordinate, and a power level 0 to 15, and it just places the power level at that coordinate. For example, if you put in 3, 5, and a power level of 8, you'll get an 8 on the dust that is 3 blocks over and 5 blocks up. Then I had to decide which 16 sprites to use for Mario. If you play the NES version and count how many different ways Mario can appear, you'll notice it's way more than 16. So I had to be smart and make the absolute most of these 16 sprites. And after a lot of thinking, here are the 16 I chose. The bottom row, 12 through 15, are for small Mario. 12 is when he's just standing, 13 is running, 14 is jumping, and 15 is when he grabs a star. And then the next row, 8 through 11, is the same thing but for Big Mario, and 4 through 7 is for Fire Mario. And then 3 is for when he's Fire Mario but then gets hit by something, causing him to be invincible for a little bit. 2 is a similar story, it's when he's Big Mario and gets hit, again causing invincibility. 1 is when he gets hit a final time, aka death, and 0 is blank. This is necessary, otherwise there'd be a Mario at every position. In my opinion, this is the best I could do with 16 states. I was pretty happy with it because overall, I didn't give up very much. I gave up crouching, but that's fine because there's no fireballs to avoid and there's nothing to slide under. I also gave up this one pivoting state when he switches direction really quickly, but that's also fine because it's a small detail. And I gave up the ability to face left because these all face to the right. Technically, you could solve this by creating a left-facing layer and switching between the two, but I just preferred the elegance of only one layer for Mario. Next, it was time to get Mario moving. In most of my previous games, movement was done by either adding or subtracting to the XY coordinate. For example, in Pac-Man, when you press right, it adds 1 to the X coordinate on every frame. This moves Pac-Man to the right at a constant speed. The problem is, in Super Mario Bros., Mario doesn't move at a constant speed. He has momentum. When you press right, he gets faster and faster. And when you let off, he slows down until he stops. So I had to make a momentum-based movement system, which I had never done before. To do this, I started by focusing on just left and right movement first, or movement in X. Since Mario can move at a variety of different speeds, my first idea was to use a ROM to generate different frequencies. The way this works is it sends out a signal every time it hits a torch on the line you selected. For example, this line of ROM has torches all over it, so when you activate it, it sends out a signal very frequently. But this line of ROM only has a few torches, so when it's activated, the signal is much less frequent. And the idea is that if you make this signal add or subtract to the position, you can change between different speeds. A higher frequency changes the position faster, and a lower frequency changes it slower. However, generating frequencies felt really clunky. It wasn't very mathematical, and I felt like there had to be a better way to do this. So I thought about it some more, and after a day or two, I came up with a new system. Instead of using ROM, I took inspiration from how the NES version is actually coded and made 2 registers, one for Mario's X velocity and one for Mario's X position. And the idea is that on every frame, the velocity is added to the position. So for example, if the velocity is 0, then 0 is added to the position and Mario stays in place. But if it's 1, then 1 is added and he'll move to the right. Or if it's 2, then he'll move to the right twice as fast. Or if it's -3, he'll move to the left 3 times as fast. This allowed me to classify velocity as a single number, positive to the right, negative to the left, and the further away from 0, the faster the speed. Now I just had to increase or decrease the X velocity based on which keys are pressed. So I built some hardware to follow these 3 rules. If just right is pressed, the velocity increases, until it either reaches a max speed or collides with a solid tile, setting it to 0. Similarly, if just left is pressed, the velocity decreases, until again it reaches a max speed or has a collision. And if neither key is pressed, or both keys are pressed, the velocity will gravitate towards 0, slowing Mario down to a stop. Admittedly, these rules might be very different from how the NES does it, but I didn't really care, because when I tried them out, it felt great. Then I built 2 more registers for the Y velocity and Y position, and I made another separate system of rules for changing the Y velocity. When Mario is not standing on something, his velocity decreases because of gravity, until it either reaches a max falling speed or hits something. And while he's in the air, you cannot jump. But if he is standing on something, his velocity is 0, unless you press jump, which instantly sets it to a positive number. And with that, the movement system was completely done. Next, I started to work on the collision system. I needed to make a circuit to take in Mario's position and the solid tile positions, and output whether or not Mario is colliding with something above him, below, left, or right. In a lot of my previous games, this kind of circuit has been relatively straightforward. Take the signal of the thing you care about, in this case Mario, and plug it into AND gates with the 4 tiles around it. If any of them output true, then you know Mario must be right next to that tile. But since Mario has 4x4 positions per game tile, it's not that simple anymore. For example, let's say you want to know if Mario is colliding with the tile below. We at least know this is true when the position is in the bottom left. Remember, that's when he's perfectly aligned in the tile, so he's clearly standing on the block. But notice that he's also standing on the block when his position is here, here, and here. And here, here, and here. In any of these positions, there's at least a little bit of his feet still touching. So you actually have to check all 7 of these positions to confirm that there's a collision with the tile below. Now let's say you want to know if Mario is colliding with the tile above. In this case, you can actually just check the exact same positions. Small Mario is exactly 1 tile tall, so the logic for his feet applies to his head. And in a similar fashion, if you want to know if he's colliding with a tile to the left or right, you have to check not only this position, but also these 3 and these 3, for a total of 7 again. Of course, the other thing to consider here is that Big Mario and Fire Mario are twice as tall, but that's actually not a big problem. I found out that you can just run this logic for both halves of Mario at once, and everything will behave fine. So, back in Minecraft, I spent the day building this with redstone. This was tough because there's a lot of overlapping detections going on. As you can see from this picture, the groups of positions are all over each other. But after a few iterations, it was finally working. To test it out, I quickly made a temporary layer for the solid tiles, and as you can see, when I run the clock, Mario falls down and lands on it. If he moves left, he stays on that tile even if just a little bit of his foot is still on. If he moves right, he rams into that other tile and stops. And if he jumps, then of course he goes up and comes back down and stops. The most natural thing to do now would be to move on to the tile layer, but I actually started to work on the background layer next. I did this because I had a really good idea for the background, and I just had to see if it was too good to be true. Textures can be scaled up to any size, so I thought, why not put the entire level's background on a single piece of dust? When the level scrolls, I could just use a shift register to move it. In theory, this works, but in practice, the shift register would need to be way too long. However, I wasn't done with this idea yet. After some thinking, I figured out a way to make the shift register a reasonable size while still taking advantage of massive texture scaling. Instead of putting the entire background on one power level, I split it into 13 parts. And instead of one long shift register, I made a smaller looping shift register that increments the power level when the dust comes back around. So here's how it works. When the game starts, the shift register has one dust on with a power level of 1. As you scroll through the level, it shifts, which shifts the background. Once the dust reaches the end of the shift register, it loops around and increments to 2, which seamlessly switches the background to the next piece. Then this piece gets shifted all the way until it loops around again, and yeah, you get the idea. This system was absolutely beautiful, and just like that, the entire background layer was done. Next, I went back and worked on the tile layer. I kind of started it earlier with these solid white tiles, but now it was time to replace them with the real deal. I made power level 1 and 2 show up as bricks, 1 being a normal brick, and 2 for when there's a star inside. And I made 3 and 4 show up as question blocks, 3 for a coin, and 4 for a power-up. And those are actually all the tiles I decided to do. On the NES version, there's also a brick with coins inside, but I didn't put this in because I wasn't planning on making a coin system. And there's also a hidden question block with a 1-up, but I wasn't planning on making a live system either. Now, one thing you might be wondering is why do I not have the ground tile, polished tile, or the pipes? These are all solid, so don't they need to be on the tile layer as well? Well, yes and no. They are solid, but their textures never change. Mario can never break them or modify them. So because of that, I made an optimization. Ground tiles, polished tiles, and pipes are all represented with power level 15 on the tile layer, which represents an invisible solid tile. And their textures are actually on the background. Again, this is just an optimization. It would have been perfectly fine to have them as real tiles as well. Then, since I knew the whole tile layer was going to need to scroll at some point, I put all of it into a giant 2D shift register. This allowed me to shift all tiles at once with the press of a button. And then, since I knew the level is much longer than the screen, I made a giant ROM to store all the tiles for the rest of the level. This might look super complicated, but all it is a giant feed tape that stores every column of tiles in order. and as you scroll through the level, it continuously brings in the next column to the tile layer. Now that I could scroll through the tiles and the background, I combined them into one big circuit. Using this button, I could now scroll through the entire level and see all the tiles. And on top of that, Mario could actually run around and jump on them too. The scrolling was still a manual button press though, so next I worked on getting that to be automatic. On the NES version, when Mario gets about halfway across the screen, it scrolls. And importantly, it can only scroll forwards. Even if you walk all the way back, there's no way to get to previous parts of the level. So in Minecraft, I detected when Mario is halfway across the screen with the decoder, and made that signal trigger a shift to the background, the tiles, and to Mario himself. And that's about it. That's all there is to automatic scrolling. The circuit ended up being a lot simpler than I thought. Now I could run through the level completely automatically, which was a really cool feeling. Although, still not as cool as finishing a lesson on today's partner, Brilliant. Brilliant is how I get smarter every day, with thousands of lessons in math, computer science, programming, and more. Every lesson has been crafted to not only teach you things, but also understand concepts from the ground up. You'll get hands-on with physics problems, digital circuits, and even programming robots from scratch. I really like them because they don't just focus on memorization like my high school did. By playing with the concepts yourself, you'll become a better thinker and be able to apply your knowledge to new things faster. One example of this is the Thinking in Code course. It obviously shows you the fundamentals like if statements and loops, but it very quickly has you apply these concepts to real problems. And that's what's really important when you take this knowledge to a software job or building Redstone or whatever other cool things you want to do. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/mattbatwings or scan the QR code on screen, or you can click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. At this point, Mario could run through the level and collide with solid tiles, so I was making really good progress. But obviously there was still a lot to do. Mario couldn't even interact with the tiles yet. So I started thinking about which tile interactions to include, and I landed on these two main ones. Mario should be able to break bricks, as long as he's not small, and Mario should also be able to hit a question block or a brick with a star to turn it into a close block. Of course, this also spawns the item, but I'm only talking about tiles right now. These two interactions call for some animations, so first I added some animated sprites like the coin coming out and the brick breaking. Then, in preparation for Redstone, I broke down the interactions into an exact list of rules. One rule is if I'm a brick and a big or fire Mario is below me, turn into a broken brick on the next frame. Or if I'm a broken brick, turn into nothing on the next frame. Once I had these rules, the translation to Redstone was much easier, because each rule could be made with one or two logic gates. For example, here's a Redstone circuit for the first rule. As you can see, there's a solid brick. So when Mario comes into here, the circuit detects it and outputs the signal for a broken brick. And on the next frame, it gets replaced. So yeah, I just made circuits for all of these rules and hooked them up to all the tiles in the tile layer. Once they were all tested and working, I had a ton of fun playing with them on the screen. As you can see, when Mario is small, he can't break bricks, but when he's big, he can. And when Mario hits a question block, it turns into a closed block. I was really happy to make these first interactions, because even though they were super basic, it completely brought the game to life. Next, I moved on to the item layer. Just like the tiles in the background, items need to scroll as well. So I put the item layer into another 2D shift register and hooked it up to the scrolling system. Now, in the first level, there are really only 3 items: the mushroom, the fire flower, and the star. But even though there's only 3, they do a lot of stuff. They spawn, they interact with Mario, and move around. So first, I just made a circuit to simply spawn the items. I wasn't worried about interactions or moving them yet. This was easy because most of the detection logic was already built in the tile layer. All I did was allow the item to be placed into the item layer. And as you can see, they now correctly spawn on top of the block. Once that was working, I moved on to item interactions. Starting with the mushroom and the fire flower, if Mario hits either of these, he should power up to the next state. Small to big to fire, or just stay at fire if he's already there. To make this, I built some logic to check if Mario is hitting either of those items, and I built a power-up circuit using a clever bit trick. Notice that the size of Mario is controlled by the first 2 bits of his state. If it's 3, he's small, if it's 2, he's big, and if it's 1, he's fire. So all this circuit does to power up is count down on those 2 bits. And to my surprise, this whole system worked first try. Mario collected mushrooms and fire flowers perfectly. The only other item interaction was the star. If Mario hits the star, he should turn into Star Mario for a decent amount of time. Of course, during that time he's also invincible, but that only matters when we get to mobs. So I built logic to check if Mario is hitting a star, and I built a timer to change his sprite to Star Mario temporarily. Which, by the way, used another clever bit trick. All it did was set the last 2 bits to 3. Notice that this always makes him star no matter what size he is. And amazingly, this system worked first try as well, and once again, the game just got way more lifelike. Finally, to finish out the item layer, I had to get the items to move. This is where the project took a turn for the worse. I don't know if it was just because I was out of it, or if I started to burn out, but I struggled so hard to design a circuit for this. You see, on the NES, items don't just move back and forth. I wish it was that simple. They're also affected by gravity, and some items like the star bounce around. After a few days of trying and failing, I decided that NES accurate movement was just too much. And instead, I created a simplified, yet still decently complex movement system of my own. Here's how it works. Every item has a binary direction associated with it, either left or right. You can imagine it as a secret arrow behind the scenes. When items first spawn, the direction is right. Then, on every movement, all items follow this algorithm. If there's no tile below, move down. That's the simplest case. Otherwise, if the direction is left, check the tile to the left. If it's not solid, move left. If it is solid, swap direction. And if the direction is right, check the tile to the right. If it's not solid, move right. If it is, swap direction. The nice thing is, this system still moves items in the same general way as the NES. They still fall off ledges and bounce off walls. It's just all a bit more rigid looking. But at this point, I really didn't care about the looks. I was just happy to finally come up with a compromise that I knew I could build. I got to work, and after another day, items were moving around. As you can see, if I hit this block, the mushroom falls off the ledge, bounces off the pipe, and gives Mario a power-up. Last but not least was the mob layer. You know the drill by now. I started by putting it into a 2D shift register so that it could scroll. Now, there are only 2 mobs on the first level, Goombas and Koopas. But don't be fooled, they are the most complicated entities in this entire project. They spawn in from the right as you scroll, they interact with Mario in many different ways, and they move again. Honestly though, I wasn't scared. I had been building this for over a month now, and all of these challenges were just remixes of problems I've already solved. To spawn mobs, I just reused this ROM. Now when the level scrolls, it gives out both a tile column and a mob column. To make mob interactions, I made another list of exact rules. This included things like jumping on Goombas to crush them, kicking Koopa shells, downgrading when you get hit, exploding mobs when you're in star mode, and more. And finally, to make mobs move, I reused the exact same circuit from the items. The only difference was the initial direction. Mobs spawn with a left direction, whereas items spawn with a right direction. Otherwise, they move in the exact same way. And yeah, thanks to a lot of reusing concepts and reusing circuits I already made, I finished the entire mob layer in just one day. With all the layers fully working, the build was almost done. I still had to add fireballs, so I quickly made a fireball item that kills mobs. If you're Fire Mario and press this button, it spawns one. And I also had to add the sliding down the pole to the end of the level. To do this, I just put some invisible solid tiles behind the flagpole, so Mario collides with them and appears to slide down the pole. Unfortunately, I couldn't make him physically grab the pole because all 16 Mario sprites were taken. And I couldn't make him walk to the castle either because the Mario layer was only on the left half of the screen. But at least he technically slides down the pole, and to make it a little more exciting, I also added fireworks when he gets to the bottom. That way there's at least some celebration. With that, the craziest project of my life was officially done. Super Mario Bros. With just Redstone. Here's the full list of features. It's way longer than any of my other builds. There's stuff in here I didn't even mention in the video. Now before I send you to the showcase, let me just show you something about the scale of this build. This is the view from above. Take a second to internalize this image. Okay, you ready? This is RGB Tetris. Compared to Mario, it looks like Child's Play now, which is insane, because RGB Tetris is not a simple build. And yeah, I just wanted to show you that because I thought it was insane when I started visiting my other worlds and realized how much smaller everything else is. But alright, enough rambling, enjoy the showcase. Thank you for 250,000 subscribers. If you like this video and want more like it, consider subscribing. It's free and it's the best way to support this content. And if you really liked it, then check out my Patreon page. You'll get real-time updates on my projects, early access to videos, and more. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out, guys.